Isn't it interesting when you talk about resilience that, all these factors that we plan in, Matt, they are a risk matrix. We have figured out what we're going to do. We've got our playbooks, we've got our SOC, we've done all our testing and so on and so forth. Things are in the green. They're in the green till they're not green. When that happens, that not in the green status change is extraordinarily fast. In the last 2 weeks alone, I think I've blogged about it briefly, I've seen 3 or 4 clients with live indications of compromise, and it is absolutely terrifying. And they are rehearsed. They do have the resilience, and they have had to enact it. So their status went from, we've got this, we're well trained, we've got everything in place, we're in the green, to we're not in the green. What's your view?
You fall off a cliff really quickly with this kind of thing. I absolutely agree. It isn't something that's getting creepingly worse and you've got time to prep and be ready for it. I think we learned a lot about that last year in terms of supply chain resilience and a lot of panicked responses to some of the higher profile tech failures that we saw last year. But you don't get to fix that, and you have a period of exposure while you're getting that capability up in place and you're putting appropriate levels of resilience in. If it's your own core infrastructure and systems that have been compromised by a cyber incident, there isn't that time. It's gone. You need to do it in advance and you need to prepare. And I think the world is starting to understand that, but perhaps what they're not understanding yet, or the penny hasn't fully dropped, is that this is different. And this is different to being prepped and rehearsed for natural disaster, for flood, for fire, for power loss, because those things happen under ideal conditions. We have a fully mirrored resilient data center that we just flip over to, and perhaps we practice that once every 6 months or so. The harsh reality of recovering from a successful, depending on your point of view, cyber attack is that you won't be operating in ideal conditions, far from it.
And I think you're absolutely right. Time is the enemy. And one thing I wanted to say at the beginning of this, so let's take this podcast that we're doing right now as a real raw example. I wrote on the top of my pad, raw, gloves off, no show, just Matt and Dan talking as human beings about what they've learned over time, right? How rehearsed are we with IT, tech, SaaS, all that kind of stuff? When you're under this time eliminator, it's extraordinary what happens. I've had it so many times, you're sitting there, your cockpit, things go wrong. You need them so rehearsed, know what to do and who to talk to and so on and so forth. We could call it our SOC or air traffic control in that metaphor. These are important things, but there are priorities and the pressure. That's when systems break and buckle, don't they? And we've proven that.
That's where the humans break and buckle, particularly in terms of their decision-making capability.
Yes.
My experience is we make terrible decisions when we're under pressure. Looking at situations where we've been through tabletop exercises with senior leadership, it takes real discipline to keep the playbook in front of you and to follow the playbook. The natural leadership tendencies in us tend to come through, and we tend to freeball it, and that's a recipe for disaster. So not only do we have to have these things written down, we also have to have gone through that sort of cultural simulation of having followed the playbook, having ignored the temptation to go off piste on it. And this isn't just about those top level executive decisions, it's very much about the technical detail of it as well. Familiarity is our friend here for once. We have to have rehearsed this, and we have to rehearse it constantly rather than saying we'd solve that problem when we get to it.
Well, in that case, Matt, I'd like to propose a sort of hypothesis, which is resilience in this use case. It's actually a perishable skill. It decays. We always revert back to our strongest path, our strongest muscle memory, our strongest rehearsal that we've had, primacy, or the first embedded training that we ever had. And other people then show characteristics that you and I have seen, and we've spoken to many other CISOs ourselves and together, where you see some people have natural tendencies, they freeze. Some people go off piste and ad hoc and rip up the playbook and just off they go. And these are grown adults who are very experienced execs, let alone the techies, right? It's a fascinating thing to watch.
It is, and it's It comes through in both technology and human behaviors. We claim to have these resilient paths sitting around for various things, and it almost comes back to the old sort of perishable I like, right? We talk about monitoring things an awful lot, and we joke about how we don't need to monitor the telephony because the users will phone in to tell us that it's not working. And we can get really good at monitoring the production path, or our primary resilience layer, if you like, because we bear the scars of it. We know what happens when the production services go down because we get grief about them. We have to fix them. It distracts us from whatever amazing forward thinking thing we were doing at the time. And then those secondary resilient kind of services, they're harder to test, right? They're harder to prove that they're up and running because they're not being used in anger every day the way we've classically designed these kind of things. We don't load share, we don't swap, we don't test often enough because change risks that service production. Maybe we've designed these things wrong from the start. Maybe they should be closer to equal use. It's got to be there. It's got to be front and center, because if there's no so what, the backup circuit's down. Oh well, the primary circuit's got a 4 nines SLA on it. Where's the so what? Kick it to the back of the list. We don't deal with it until it's too late.
And there is the interesting thing you just said, it the so what. The so what.